I function as President of the Security Council. I now give the floor to the representative of the observer State of Palestine.
Thank you, Mr. President. If the Israeli assault stopped today and we decided to hold a funeral every single day for each Palestinian killed in the last 8 months, it would take us 100 years to honor them all. This Council adopted only a week ago a resolution on the protection of UN and humanitarian personnel. It would take us, if we held a funeral a day for these humanitarian personnel, over a year to honor them all. There's barely anything left in Gaza. Israel has destroyed everything. But there is everything left still in Gaza. 2.3 million people who have been in a constant battle with death for the last 8 months. They are victims. They are heroes because they refuse to surrender to death. But they are victims who deserve to be helped as victims, not only admired as heroes. 8 months later, we are yet to tell them that help is on the way. You cannot unhear the screams of a mother who did everything in her power to save her children and failed. Parents who, having lost a child, have to carry the others to safety, not having the time to mourn and finding safety nowhere. Orphans taken care of by the next closest relative until none of them is left. Families wandering the streets, traumatized, aching, desperate, coming from nowhere, heading to nowhere. They are in a no-life's land, trying to get to tomorrow, where it all starts all over again. There are people starving, only a few feet away from aid, and yet unable to reach it. Despite several binding orders by the International Court of Justice in the case of genocide brought forward by South Africa, Israel has made sure that famine sets in, obstructing aid and allowing its destruction by its extremists and settlers. Instead of halting immediately its offensive on Rafah, as ordered by the world's highest court, it has bombed people it had displaced while they were sheltering in tents. The whole world sees that there is no safe zone in Gaza. The world saw Palestinian families, children burnt alive. It is unbearable to see a loved one killed before your eyes. But imagine the pain to see them burnt alive, screaming in agony, to hold a beheaded child in your arms, or pull from this hell their sharp corpse. The whole world warned of what an Israeli offensive in Rafah would mean and opposed such an offensive. And yet Israel proceeded with the consequences that you all foresaw: unbearable human suffering. Israel wants Palestinians to understand that if they remain in Gaza, that is their fate, death or displacement. Maybe I should say death and displacement, displacement and death. When will it be enough? What other level of cruelty must be reached before this assault is finally brought to an end? There is no red line imposed by legality, rationality, humanity that Israel has not crossed. It is now crossing the red line set by the entire world on Rafah, and it is the duty of this Council to uphold that red line. Human lives are at stake. To uphold that red line and to take decisive action to force Israel to halt its military offensive and to withdraw its occupation forces and to ensure an immediate ceasefire. The adoption of the draft resolution put forward by Algeria yesterday would be an important step in that direction. Mr. President, the whole world sees the targeting of civilians and indiscriminate attacks against them, the use of starvation as a method of war, the summary executions in the streets, including of people blindfolded and handcuffed. They saw hospitals turned into graveyards, the mass graves. But somehow one should trust Israel when it says it is investigating the conduct of the self-proclaimed, and I quote, most moral army in the world, end quotes. An army committing war crimes on a daily basis. Anyone interested in the truth or in accountability should not be interested in Israel's sham investigations. Israeli investigators and Israeli courts are designed to perpetuate and enable the occupation and its crimes and exactions against the occupied people that Israel as occupying power should be protecting. These are its targets, the people that it should be protecting as an occupying power. They are not designed to achieve accountability. That is why Israel rejects international investigations and fears them. If after bombing 3 different cars of a humanitarian convoy by the world-renowned World Central Kitchen, who had given their coordinates, killing 7 international aid workers, Israel reprimanded and dismissed a couple of officers. That is the measures it has taken. Reprimand and dismiss for the killing and targeting of humanitarian personnel. What chance do Palestinians stand to see one day accountability based on Israeli investigation and decisions? What hope is there for justice? Mr. President, Israel can kill any Palestinian and call them either terrorists or human shields to justify their murder. It uses both terms extremely loosely, so they can cover anyone and everyone. Israel has called any form of opposition to its occupation and its oppression of the Palestinian people terrorism, including defense of human rights, diplomatic action, approaches to judicial institutions to examine its actions. All legal actions have been characterized by Israel as terrorism. Similarly, it considers that it can bomb entire neighborhoods using indiscriminate and massive bombardments and simply say about the thousands of Palestinians it has killed, unfortunately, they were human shields. You have experienced yourselves as council members how loosely Israel uses these terms. As the Israeli representative accused member of the council, the entire UN membership, the Secretary General, the prosecutor of the ICC, of being anti-Semites, supporters of terrorism, collaborators of Nazism, in his usual measured and responsible way. But the difference is that Israel does not decide whether you live or die, but it decides the fate of every Palestinian. You have learned to live with Israel's irrational and racist behavior, but we die because of it. The incitement by the Israeli representatives against the UN has real-life consequences, cannot be tolerated any longer. They signal to their soldiers, to their extremists, that the UN is an enemy and a legitimate target. This explains why this is the deadliest conflict for UN personnel, why they can be arrested and tortured, why the UNRWA headquarters in Jerusalem could be attacked and set ablaze, because of that incitement. Mr. President, what is the most outrageous is that Israel is outraged by the very actions it undertakes as long as it is not the one undertaking them. When it undertakes them, they become justified and defensible. Israel can come here and explain how horrifying it is to see civilians killed in indiscriminate attacks or in the safety of their homes, while obliterating entire Palestinian families at a time. It can come to explain the fear that Israelis feel as they have to shelter when hearing sirens, while it conducts massive bombardments against a Palestinian population that has nowhere to shelter, that doesn't have the energy to fear anymore. It will come to demand action for those held in captivity for the last 7 months, while it has held Palestinians in captivity one generation after another for the last 7 decades. And while there is evidence of it abducting thousands in the last 7 months alone, killing several Palestinians while in detention, and imposing such abuse and ill treatment on others that they had to suffer amputations. It will say how despicable it is to use people as human shields, while it has a long record of using Palestinians as human shields during its military incursions and operations in occupied territory, sometimes placing them in front of its military jeeps while it is making its incursions into our cities and refugee camps. I have heard the Israeli representative here in New York saying that detaining bodies was barbaric. as it deprived the families from the ability to mourn and offer dignified burial to their loved ones. Israel has detained the bodies of hundreds of Palestinians it has killed, sometimes for over 3 decades without being able to bury our loved ones, detained by Israel in graves with numbers instead of their names, so we could not recognize where they are buried. But that is human when Israel does it, not barbaric. Israel accuses many of seeking its destruction, says that all its actions are justified by this existential threat it faces, while it actively and openly pursues the destruction of our country and our people. It expresses outrage at the slogan, "Palestine will be free from the river to the sea," and says that this is a genocidal call, while its own prime minister not only has repeatedly used the phrase "Israel from the river to the sea," but held a map at the General Assembly podium where Israel was from the river to the sea and Palestine had disappeared altogether. And he is acting accordingly on the ground, including by committing a genocide in Gaza and pursuing colonization of the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. It's not words, it's actions. It wants occupation and violent oppression for Palestinians and peace and security for itself. It does not understand what is the big deal, why the world fails to support it in achieving this absurd goal. Occupation, oppression for Palestinians, peace and security for Israel. Why not? Certainly, Israel explains the lack of support by anti-Semitism. Not because what Israel wants is illegal, immoral, goes against every fiber of human decency you can have in your body. Never mind that experience has proven it is impossible to achieve. It keeps invoking the Holocaust and its 6 million victims to justify its crimes, forgetting that the greatest lesson of the Holocaust is that war crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide can never be justified, never, and must always be combated, regardless of the identity of the victims and the identity of the perpetrators. No civilian should be harmed, regardless of their nationality, their origin, their religion, their race. They're all irrelevant. They should be protected. So, given Israel's mindset, it is logical that this Israeli government would interpret the recognition of the State of Palestine by Spain, Ireland, and Norway as somehow an attack against Israel. Never mind the fact that these countries have recognized Israel decades ago without asking for anyone's approval. That was not unilateral when they recognized Israel. It becomes a unilateral move when they recognize the State of Palestine. Never mind that they advocate a two-state solution, where Palestine lives side by side with Israel, where Palestinians and Israelis live in peace and security. Never mind that these countries have all a strong record in their support for international law and just peace. Never mind that the Palestinian people have a right to self-determination, including to the independence of their state, and that Israel cannot be allowed to have a veto right over these rights for the Palestinian people. How did Israel respond? By promising more criminality. More criminality, colonization, breaching the historic status quo at Al-Haram al-Sharif, stealing our money. A state that behaves that manner. It's because they've been above the law for so long that they have no problem acting as an outlaw state. We thank the 3 countries for their important decision in support of freedom and peace, as we thank Barbados, Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, and Bahamas, and all the countries that made a similar choice over the years, and call on all the countries that have yet to recognize the State of Palestine to do so as an investment in freedom and an investment in peace in these tragic times. We also thank all the countries which supported the membership of the State of Palestine in the UN. That day is coming, where we will be members in the United Nations and free. How is it possible that Israel cannot see how absurd its position is, how evident its selective outrage is? Because it considers us subhumans. Or let me use the words of the Israeli leaders, human animals. Ethnic cleansing, apartheid, genocide, across history, have always been made possible by dehumanizing a nation. And that is what is happening here. They have been dehumanizing us for so long that they don't understand your indignation when Palestinians are killed. They don't understand what's the issue. Why are they being brought here to discuss that matter? They do not understand how anyone can, despite the historical record, speak of historical injustice against the Palestinian when speaking of our fate. Why anyone would decide to recognize our existence as a people, our rights as a nation, and our state. They do not understand how anyone can dare equate between their civilians and our civilians. Because our civilians are less civilians than their civilians. We are lesser human beings. That is the equivalence they truly reject when they speak of the ICC. That is the equivalence that annoys them, that Palestinian victims could be considered victims, forgetting that the court's responsibility is towards the victims, not the perpetrators. They want for Palestinian victims to be left with no protection and for Israeli perpetrators to continue being shielded. And that is unacceptable, and everyone should say so. Israel trusts that it will get away with its crimes. Why? Because of 75 years of experiencing full-fledged impunity. Any statement that reinforces that feeling of somehow being a state above the law, being entitled to an exceptional status, will only encourage Israel to continue acting as an outlaw state. This must be a time for accountability. If after Gaza there is no accountability, if after a genocide we don't have accountability, when will we have it? And does anyone believe that if Israel's impunity is preserved, they will change course? They will wake up one day and say, yes, we want to have peace with the Palestinians. That is the reasonable choice to make. That's not how it will happen. Each and every state can make the colonial occupation costly and thus contribute to bringing it to an end. Tomorrow's freedom and peace will be made possible by the decisions you take today. Allow us to tell our people who are suffering unbearable pain that help is on the way, and that this nightmare, this hell on earth will end, and that this solidarity they see in every corner of the globe will translate into resolute action to stop this genocide, achieve freedom and advance peace. There is no objective more worthy, there is no time more pressing, there is no greater responsibility. Finally, Palestinians should no longer have to die and suffer to remain on their land. Life in freedom and dignity in our homeland. That is our simple dream that must prevail over the nightmare imposed on our people for so long.
I thank the representative of the